Hello and welcome to the Working Better Together, How to Manage Sub-Awards and Sub-Recipients. My name is Jamil Evans with OJP TFSC. And before we begin, there are a few housekeeping announcements I would like to make. This live discussion webinar is being hosted by the OJP for Office Justice Programs. If you have any technical issues during this session, please contact OJP TFSC at usdoj.gov. You can access the informational brochure and the FAQs with the links I'll provide in the chat. To ask a question during this session, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. So let's just give it a test. Let's post the last thing you had for breakfast in the chat. And also, in order to have a most accurate attendance, please use the chat box to tell us the number of people joining you on the call, including yourself. All right, so everything except the Q&A discussion will be recorded today. And since your feedback is so important to us, at the end of the webinar, we will provide a survey link. Before we begin, let's go over a couple of Zoom tips. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a microphone icon. And you just click that to unmute yourself if you want to speak. And click it again, you'll see a red slash. That's how you know you're muted. If you're dialed in over the phone, you can unmute with *6. If you're not speaking today, please ensure you mute yourself and just avoid any background interruptions. To the right of the microphone icon, you'll see a video icon. You can click that to start your video. Click it again, you see a red slash. That's how you know your video is off. To the right of those icons, you'll see a chat icon. You just click it to open your chat window, and this is where you communicate with everyone on the platform today. You also have the option to send public and private chats. Send a private chat to anyone. You just click the little drop down menu there, select who you want to send a private chat to, and just compose your message. On the top right-hand side of your screen, you can change your viewing experience. So you can go with the speaker view, where you can see who's speaking right at that time, or you can go with the gallery view, which is kind of like the Brady Bunch grid. So let's meet our presenters. Our first presenter is Crystal McNeil Wright. She's an associate CFO for the Grants Financial Management Division in the Office of Justice Programs, and she brings more than 30 years of leadership experience. Crystal is also a published author on a book of parenting. We'll also have Michael Williams. He's a staff accountant trainer for the Evaluation and Oversight Branch in the Grants Financial Management Division. Mr. Williams brings more than 20 years of accounting and financial management training experience to the position. Also joining us today is Zarel Acevedo. He's a financial specialist for the OJP TFSC and a native to Puerto Rico. Last and certainly not least, we'll have Francis Mendez. He's a project director for the OJP TFSC. Francis has a background in law, social work, and business administration. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Crystal.
Thanks so much, Jamil. Welcome, Puerto Rico. We're so very excited to have you guys with us this morning. As Jamil said, my name is Crystal McNeil Wright. I'm the Associate CFO for the Grants Financial Management Division here at OJP. And it is my team in a partnership with the TFSC that will be teaching you and helping you understand better how to manage your sub-recipients. So let me just go through the agenda. As I said, we'll be presenting on sub-recipient monitoring, all things you need to know about that. We'll also be going through some case scenario discussions and Q&A. And then after that, we'll have some open discussions and questions that we'll be able to, where you'll be able to ask anything that you desire. If we don't have the answer today, we'll certainly get back to you. And then we'll go through some closing remarks and next steps. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Michael Williams. He is one of our lead trainers within OJP to present to you how to manage your sub-recipients. Thank you.
My name is Michael Williams from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedule today to be a part of this seminar on pass-through entities' oversight responsibility for their sub-recipients. With that, let's get started. Next slide, please. Based on the topics of this particular presentation, I think that they're very important. So we'll start off by talking about definitions. I believe that if you have a firm understanding of the terms or languages that we're using, it'll help you better understand this presentation and also how to look at various types of sub-awards and your responsibility. Then we'll get into the determination, which I think is very, very important, on how you determine one vendor from the other, or, for example, a sub-recipient from a contractor. Then most importantly is your responsibility as either the lead agency or the pass-through entity. Then we'll talk about the requirements for the pass-through entity. When we're making sub-awards and things to be mindful of in that whole process. Then we'll talk about the post-award process. And then finally, we will wrap up with the resources. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, I want to cover some definitions so that we're all on the same page in reference to understanding the terms that will be used throughout this presentation. So we'll do definitions for sub-awards, sub-recipients, contractor, contract, as well as the pass-through entity. So starting off first with the pass-through entity, a pass-through entity is a non-federal entity that provides a sub-award to a sub-recipient to carry out part of the program that they initially received from the federal agency. This term, for further review, can be found in the Uniform Guidance under 2 CFR Part 200.1, where you'll find all of the definitions in reference to the Uniform Guidance. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about a sub-award. Now the sub-award is an award that has been provided by the pass-through entity to a sub-recipient, and this sub-recipient will be carrying out an aspect of this particular grant program. I will be using this term throughout this presentation because it's very important to understand that the sub-recipient is carrying out an aspect of the grant program by passing those funds down to the sub-recipient. But here's what I need you to know. A sub-award does not include payments to a contractor or to an individual that is a beneficiary of federal funds. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say that we're talking about federal funds that have been passed down to the widow of a fallen police officer. So even though these funds are being passed down to the police officer's widow, this does not create a sub-recipient relationship, okay? So that's very, very important that you remember that the sub-recipient will be carrying out an aspect of that particular grant program. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about a sub-recipient. So a sub-recipient is considered a non-federal entity that receives the sub-award from the pass-through entity. And then again, here's that term that I want to stress, that is carrying out an aspect of that particular grant program. So again, as I stated, that all definitions can be found in the 2 CFR 200.1. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about a contract. Okay, so a contract is a legal instrument by which a non-federal entity purchases either property or services needed to carry out the project or program under the federal award. Two things that distinguish a sub-recipient from a contract is here, as you'll see, you're either purchasing property or services, but I don't want you to get tied up right now on these two terms, especially services, because sometimes an entity can be providing services that is carrying out an aspect of that particular grant. So I want you to be mindful when we're talking about the distinctions between a contractor and a subrecipient. So now the term as used here does not include a legal instrument. If the non-federal entity has considered it a contract based on their review, just because they've considered it a contract may not necessarily mean how the federal government will look at this arrangement based on the substance of that particular contract. And I'll get into talking about substance and how to look at that later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Contractor. So we're talking about a contractor is an entity that receives this particular contract as defined in the previous slide. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about that determination, determining a subrecipient as opposed to a contractor. So it's very important to understand that the determination of whether an entity receiving federal funds is a subrecipient or a contractor need to know that it's not always straightforward. So I'll give you some tools on how to make that determination. But again, keep in mind, as I said earlier, this is not necessarily how the federal government, based on your determination, will review or view that particular agreement, okay? It's important to understand that no one single item or factor can dictate one relationship over the other. So in fact, an entity may possess several characteristics. Remember I said about either a contractor or a subrecipient on both sides of this determination factor, which I'll share with you later. So this makes that whole process challenging in order to determine which is a subrecipient or a contractor. The federal awarding agency is always able to assist if you're having problems making that determination. Next slide, please. So in making that determination, it is important to understand that the form or the legal contract is less important than the substance. So when I talk about form, I'm talking about that agreement. So whether we're talking about a contract, memorandum of understanding, or some other term that your organization use, this is the agreement that we will look at when we come out to your particular agency to make sure that we can identify all of the deliverables of that agreement in there. But when we're talking about the determination of a subrecipient and a contractor, we and you should be more focused on the substance. What is actually being agreed to, or the services that's being provided? The agreement or the actual substance of the work that's being provided is more important because it will distinguish whether or not we're talking about a subrecipient or a contractor. Next slide, please. So to give you an example of this determination process, the uniform guidance has come up with what they call characteristics of each, either a subrecipient or a contractor. I normally lay my hat on the last section of subrecipient, where it says, in accordance with its agreement, uses the federal funds to carry out a part of that particular program for a public purpose. So again, if I can determine that what's being transferred here to this other non-federal entity is to carry out an aspect of that particular grant program, 9 times out of 10, I am going to look at it as a subrecipient. Now, on the other side, the contractor, here is where some organizations or grantees kind of missed the mark here. I'll use that term. Whereas if you look at the first, the second, and the third lines here under contractors, they say that provides goods and services. So how some organizations have missed the mark or not properly classified an organization as a sub-recipient because they were looking at services being provided, okay? So we can, and remember I said earlier, we can provide service because it's a portion of that particular grant program, but I don't want you to get hung up on the word service and then automatically move it to a contractor's side. So I'll give you an example of what I mean here. So let's just say that you're receiving an award to address an issue within your community for youth at risk of joining gangs. So let's just say that this particular grant program will allow you to find employment for these youth, train these youth, and then also provide mentoring to these particular youth. So the grant program consists of three components. Your organization is able to do the training and job placement for these youth, but no one within your organization possesses the skills or the background to do the mentoring. So you look for an organization that you can bring that component into the grant program. So keep in mind, mentoring is a service that's being provided for the grant program. So although it's a service, it's a part of carrying out the three aspects of that particular grant, making this organization that's providing the mentoring service a sub-recipient. Okay, so that's very important. So again, looking at this particular graph, I said earlier that no one item on either side of the graph here will determine one relationship from the other. But for me, when I'm looking at sub-recipients on that side, the last item on that side is the one that I always try to determine whether or not we're talking about a sub-recipient and or contractor. Next slide, please. Now, the pass-through entity's responsibility. Next slide. So when we're talking about a pass-through entity's responsibility, they're responsible for ensuring that the grant funds are used for the intended purposes and with the federal guidelines for that particular program to be kept in place. The pass-through entity is responsible for, and I have it on here, the oversight for the day-to-day operations down at the sub-recipients level, but I am not suggesting that the that the pass-through entity must set up a desk down at the sub-recipients level. I'm saying that you're responsible for the day-to-day activities because anything that goes sideways or awry down at the sub-recipient level, as the pass-through entity, it is your responsibility to bring them back in line with the grant programs or get them back on track. So again, you need to ensure that the sub-recipients are achieving the goals and objectives of that particular grant program. They're following the guidelines for that particular program. The costs that they are incurring are within line with the budget that they submitted to you. Next slide, please. So the pass-through entity should ensure that sub-recipients submit all reports or documentation in a timely manner. If your sub-recipients are not submitting documentation to you in a timely manner, it will affect your ability to submit those reports to the federal funding source in a timely manner. So you want to make sure that your sub-recipients have policy and procedures in reference to how things will be submitted to your organization. And again, if there are any issues down at the subrecipient level, you want to make sure as the pass-through entity that you address those as quickly as possible to make sure that you can get the subrecipient back online with the particular grant program. Next slide, please. So the pass-through entity's requirements. So now let's look at pre-award process. Next slide, please. So the pass-through entity must have established written policy and procedures on how they will make sub-awards. So what I'm saying here is that when you're making sub-awards, there needs to be a process as to how you make the announcements that you have funding for organizations to apply for, to do aspects of that particular grant program. How you're going to manage these sub-awards throughout the life cycle of that particular grant program. Next slide, please. When I talk about a pre-award risk assessment, I am now here talking about something that I highly recommend as opposed to the uniform guidance requirement, okay? So I am recommending that a pass-through entity performs a risk assessment at the application phase prior to making those awards. I mean, there are various things that you can do. You can check any history with them, their audit reports and things like that. It's not a requirement, but I think that the benefit that you'll receive by doing a pre-award risk assessment up front, you'll be able to find whether or not there are any issues with this particular applicant or proposed subrecipient. Prior to making the award, you're in a better position to place various types of special conditions based on what you found on this sub-award and have them throughout the sub-award make those adjustments or changes. You want to evaluate the possible risk of that particular applicant. Some of the things that you need to consider is whether or not the applicant is eligible to receive federal funds. A great place to do that is in SAMS.gov. Put their information in there, and if anything comes back, it'll give you an idea where they stand. Your goal is for nothing to come back once you put their information in there, because this means that they're not suspended or debarred with doing receiving federal funds. Whether or not their accounting system is a stable one that you can rely on, whether or not it's going to provide you with the information that you need, any history that you have with this applicant. And then again, the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is to look at their prior year's audit. Is there anything in there that comes to mind that would put this particular organization at risk? And again, the results of this risk assessment should help you determine whether or not this entity is an organization that you want to make a sub-award to, and possibly give you some information for doing site visits down the road with this particular organization. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the pass-through entity's post-award process, okay, and the risk assessment. Next slide, please. According to the uniform guidance, the pass-through entity is required now to perform a risk assessment of each subrecipient for non-compliance with the federal statutes, regulations, and terms, conditions of the award, okay? This helps you, as I said earlier, to determine the appropriate level of monitoring that is needed for the organizations that you're passing funds down to. Now, even though I'm financial and I think basically financial accounting systems and how they handle their money and things like that, a part of the risk assessment should also look at program requirements. They should be taken in consideration because, again, a subrecipient can violate either financial requirements and or programmatic requirements. Now, there are a number of different attributes or factors that you can use in your risk assessment. The final score, when you're reviewing any particular entity, should lead you to some type of level or scoring factor. So whether we're using alphabets or numbers, it should get you somewhere where you're saying that an entity is either a low, medium, or high risk. Next slide, please. Here is an example of what I mean. The pass-through entity should develop a method to determine the risk level. So again, remember when I talked about various types of attributes or risk factors? Here's just a sample of what I came up. I'm using the number format, 1, 2, 3, with 3 being of a high risk. So the first one here is confidential funds or petty cash. I think that anytime an organization has a petty cash box on hand, that puts them at a higher risk of mismanagement, possibly, of those grant funds. So I would tend that to be of a high risk. The next one, sub-awards. Sub-awards under $25,000, so follow me here. I'm not saying that all sub-awards under $25,000 are low risk. In my example here, I've made the assumption that this pass-through entity, for the most part, makes awards in sub-awards in excess of $100,000. So a small award of $25,000 would put them at a lower risk, not necessarily meaning that mismanagement cannot happen down at the lower level award, but again, it probably wouldn't rank high on the attribute factors that I'm looking at. And then delinquent reports. Now, I'm not saying that if one report is delinquent, then they become a medium risk. But if there are 2, possibly 3 reports that have been delinquent from this sub-recipient, this is something that you would want to look into, because again, it could be an indication that there is something going wrong down at that particular agency. So when you're looking at creating your monitoring list, you need to make sure that you're looking at all of the factors. So we're not doing monitoring or site visits of only high risk. Based on our population of low, medium, high, there should be a mixture of each level when we're creating our monitoring plan. Because the idea is anybody that's on the high risk, we want to move them to medium or low. Anybody that's on a low risk, we want to make sure that they stay there and not move to medium or high. Next slide, please. So again, the assessment of these attributes should provide a clear basis for creating that monitoring plan. While this process is not all inclusive, it should give the pass-through entity a starting point as to what organization should be in our plan for this year, whether we're talking about in-person or desk review. So based on these risk factors that could change each year, we want to make sure that we are looking at that to ensure that we're including all of the sub-recipients that are in our population that may warrant some type of review. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the pass-through entities, post-award sub-recipient monitoring. Next slide. Now, the pass-through entity should create an annual monitoring plan. Okay, so based on our population, this is something that needs to be created annually. All of the sub-recipients that's in our portfolio need to be a part of this. And again, as I say, you should be able to come up with either some ranking factor of medium, high, or low. And again, remember what I said, because we have, people that are on the high, that shouldn't be the only people that are included in our monitoring plan. The types of monitoring that you can do is either on-site or in-house, and understanding that based on the posture that we're in with this pandemic, you're probably doing more desk reviews and even possibly some virtual reviews, okay? So the effective implementation of a monitoring plan may also identify potential areas where some of your sub-recipients may need some type of assistance from you and or training. Next slide, please. So when preparing for a review, a pass-through entity should review all of the documents associated with that sub-award. You're looking at the sub-recipient's application, the type of organization that they are, what's actually in the agreement, what is the sub-recipient tasked to do. You're looking at their financial and programmatic reports, and you should be able to compare them to see whether or not the amount of money that has been spent on the program truly represents the activity that has been performed. History of requesting for funds, how much has been drawn down, and again, that audit report. That audit report can provide you with some important information. Next slide, please. Here are a few best practices for doing site visits and or basically site visits, but you can probably follow a similar process when you're doing, desk reviews. You always want to notify the sub-recipient that either you're coming on site or you're doing some type of desk review. You're reviewing their progress up to date or to date with that particular program. If we're going on site, we want to have an entrance conference with those people that need to be a part of that program and know why you're there and what you're going to be looking at. Again, that supporting documentation, you want to look at that supporting documentation. And again, remember what I said about the financial document and the programmatic document. Make sure that they line up to the best of your ability to determine whether or not they will meet the goals and objectives of that particular sub-award. Then you want to have an exit conference once you're done. Let them know what you found. Give them an opportunity to address any issues that you may have found. And then let them know that what hasn't been addressed, what you're looking for them to follow up with you on. With that corrective action plan, again, if applicable. And then once everything has been resolved, the process should be to close out either that desk review or site visit. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some post-awards remedies for sub-recipients that are non-compliant. It would be, next slide, it would be a perfect world if all of your sub-recipients did everything you wanted them to do, and there was never an issue down at the sub-recipient level. But based on certain things within the organization, there may be times where you need to be able to take certain types of actions against your sub-recipients. You can't just drop the hammer on them all of a sudden for one infraction. You have to give them an opportunity to correct whatever the actual issue is. So things that you can do with your sub-recipient with, the adequate notice is temporary withhold funds until that deficiency has been corrected. You can disallow certain types of costs. So, and what I mean by that is, let's just say an invoice come in that has a request to be reimbursed for, let's just say 6 items. One of those items or 2 of those items is questionable or unallowable. So you don't have to not pay the entire invoice. You can pay what you can only not pay what you are disallowing at that time. You can wholly or partly terminate a sub-award. But again, remember, in any fashion, we are giving them an opportunity to correct the deficiency. You may want to initiate suspension or debarment, depending on the deficiency at their agency. You also would have the ability to withhold future sub-awards or any other type of legal remedies that may be at your disposal based on the actual infraction down at the sub-recipient level. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the closeout requirements. Next slide. Pass-through entity may approve an extension of the performance period, but it needs to be within their own performance period. So sometimes based on when a sub-recipient actually starts work, they may need more time in order to successfully implement that program. So again, that's why it's always important to, as a pass-through entity, to be mindful and check on your sub-recipients as it gets time to the expiration date of that particular sub-award, because again, they could need more time. The pass-through entity must close out the sub-awards when all administrative requirements have been met, okay? The closeout should be completed within the time frame allotted by the federal agency. And then keep in mind that sub-recipients are to submit all financial, programmatic, and other reports to the pass-through entity in the specified time that you have outlined in the agreement. Next slide, please. With any presentation, there should always be resources that you can go to in order to find additional information or to give you guidance on certain things that you may not be familiar with. So next slide. So I have some here with you, for you. And as always, I always want to say the uniform guidance, the 2 CFR. Very good document. It has been updated as of October 12th, November 12th, one of those. Don't hold me, but last year it was updated. We're in the process of updating the DOJ financial guide with those updates. And then I always have these 2 documents on here in reference to internal controls, because I'm big on internal controls, making sure that an organization, and I'll use this term, know what the left hand is doing from the right hand, from the right hand. So internal controls are very important. I am not suggesting and or saying that you don't have proper internal controls in place, but I think that these are good reference documents to use to line up with the internal controls that you currently have in process to see whether or not there's anything in here that you can incorporate in your current internal control procedures. Next slide, please. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and have a good day.
Super. Thank you so much, Michael. Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Sarel Acevedo. Soy el especialista. Primera pregunta de encuesta que dice así. ¿Para cuál de los requisitos de una entidad de conducto le interesaría recibir más asistencia técnica o entrenamiento? La primera es evaluación de riesgo pre-concesión. La segunda es evaluación de riesgo post-concesión. La tercera es monitoreo del subbeneficiario. La cuarta es remedios para incumplimiento del subbeneficiario. Y la quinta son los requisitos de cierre. Así que les debe haber salido una pantallita en donde pueden escoger una de las 5 opciones. Le damos unos segunditos para que puedan contestar. Ok, así que hay un empate entre la evaluación de riesgo pre-concesión y los remedios para incumplimiento. Ok. So Michael and other OCFO colleagues, the first one is evaluation of the risk pre-award, and then the second is remedies for non-compliance. Those are the 2 top choices. Gracias a todos. Vamos ahora a seguir con lo que se llaman los escenarios de caso. Vamos a tener 2 escenarios de caso distintos y 3 actividades individuales un poquito interactivas. Go ahead, Russ. Okay, so my breakout room actually got like 3 of the 5 recommended answers. The corrective action plan was mentioned. No, suspended funds was not mentioned. Providing adequate support documentation was mentioned, and talking about their responsibilities and terms and conditions, which was also mentioned. So I think it was good. How about you, Francis?
All right, so our group, we talked about designating the high risks, increasing monitoring to focus on the deficient areas. We talked about developing a table that helped them classify, what funding is, what expenditures are permissible versus not permissible, suspending their funds, while they work to correct the deficiencies. So, nosotros hablamos clasificando de alto riesgo y monitorearlo más fuerte, hacer una tablita para clasificar cuál gasto es permitible, no permitible, suspender los fondos y trabajar con ellos para arreglar las deficiencias. Okay. Ahora yo voy a hablar sobre algunos de los recursos que nosotros tenemos para ustedes sobre este tema. Next slide. So, en el chat va a haber unos links para una lista de cotejo y una hoja de guía. Estos recursos son nuevos. La lista de cotejo es para mitigar riesgos o disfrutar las mejores prácticas que demuestran un desempeño ejemplar de los subbeneficiarios. La hoja de guía tiene información sobre definiciones, actividades críticas de monitoreo y áreas financieras y programáticas. So, en el chat va a haber los links. Next slide. Entonces, otro recurso que nosotros tenemos es que después que terminamos esta serie de webinars, vamos a mandar a ustedes un reporte resumen de este seminario que va a tener los puntos clave que es importante para recordar. Y este resumen es un recurso que puede mantener o puede compartir con los colegas también. Okay. I'm now going to turn it over. Oh, wait, we have a poll, right? Don't we have a poll? Okay,
Yes.
so ahora, okay, great. So ahora nosotros vamos a tener otro seminario que va sobre análisis de propuestos. So queríamos hacer una encuesta para ver a qué área le interesaría de ese seminario. So, la encuesta es sobre qué áreas de análisis del propuesto les gustaría aprender o discutir con otras subvencionados, el desarrollo del propuesto, la distribución entre categorías del presupuesto, adherirse al presupuesto o solicitar modificación al presupuesto. O otra tópico, y lo puedo poner en el chat. So can we launch the poll? All right, is it launched? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, so the results are showing now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Can you see it, Francis?
Great. No, I can't see it.
Okay, so I'll say it out loud. Okay, so budget modifications was the first one with 83%. And then the second one is actually developing the budget. And then the last one, which I think goes hand in hand with budget modification, is the redistribution among budget categories.
Okay, qué bien. Ahora vamos a la otra encuesta, por favor. So we're going to the next poll question. So en el seminario que queremos presentar la práctica que los grantees han tenido que han sido exitosas. So, la pregunta que tenemos para ustedes es, ¿le interesaría o estaría dispuesto a compartir su experiencia sobre análisis de presupuesto durante el seminario web de discusión entre pares? Sí, y ponga su información para contactarlo. No, pero quiere escuchar, participar o quizás necesitaría más información. So vamos a lanzar el poll para ver. So we're going to launch the poll, and I can't see it, so let me know if it comes up.
Okay, so the vast majority of them said no, but they would like to assist and listen in on it. And then yes, there are people who would like to participate and that would like us to contact them.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and do that.
Okay, fantástico. Gracias por participar en el poll. So, todo el mundo puede participar. Lo que está interesado en presentar su éxito y ayudar a su colega, nosotros vamos a contactar para planear eso. So, ahora se lo voy a entregar a Jamil, que va a hablar sobre los pasos siguientes y cerrar el seminario para nosotros. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamil. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Francis. So before we close everything out, let's go over the next steps. Please take a few moments to complete our webinar evaluation survey linked in the chat, or just scan the QR code displayed on your screen with your mobile device. To contact the Virtual Support Center or the VSC, you can email us at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. And responses to email inquiries usually take about 24 hours within the next business day. You can also schedule a consultation call with a financial specialist with the details provided in the chat. Check out our website at ojp.gov/TFSC. And the sign up for our listserv is linked in the chat below. Our next event, titled Learning Exchange Training Series number 3, Peer Discussion Webinar, Budget Analysis, is to be dated in November. And those details and a registration link can be found in the chat below. On behalf of the OJP TFSC, I would like to thank the presenters and the attendees for a great session. Just a reminder, please complete the webinar evaluation with the link provided in the chat. I hope you all enjoyed the session, and you may now disconnect.